Ah, Deadpool. I remember back in 2016 when the first Deadpool movie was released. What a breath of fresh air it was. It hit this really weird sweet spot during the superhero craze where it was more hyper-violent than the DC movies were willing to be, and also took the standard Marvel tactic of incessantly needing to inject humor to a whole new level in terms of both frequency and all-out raunchiness. In other words, Deadpool really did stand on its own during the whole glut of superhero movies over the last several years, while also poking and prodding at some of the stupid things those films were doing. Speaking only for myself, they also represented one of the few superhero films my wife actually liked. She, being possessed of a disposition toward dark fantasy and more hardcore action, could not stand anything in the MCU because she said the stories became too confusing and the action too repetitive and tame. However, she loved the raunchy humor, the relationship between Wade and Vanessa, and the hyper-violence of Deadpool. We are also both huge fans of Hugh Jackman as well as followers of Hugh and Ryan's online relationship antics, so when the news of this film first popped up, the hype was high. Now, here we are about a week into its run and the film is making quite a killing at the box office. The reported budget for the film was $200 million, and as of August 2nd, it had already made $590 million. Thus, if we use the calculation of 2.5 times the reported budget as the break-even point, Deadpool and Wolverine hit that about a week into release. So everything from this point is gravy. Financial success achieved. Yay! To be honest, looking at the kind of Venn diagram of this film though, I feel like financial success was inevitable. The previous two Deadpool movies were able to pull in over $700 million each despite being rated R, and this film was adding a huge draw on the inclusion of Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. This gives you all the fans of the original Deadpool movies, along with all of the Hugh Jackman fans, as well as the large swath of people that have spent the last several years enjoying Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman's online relationship banter. Add to this the fact that Hugh Jackman's Wolverine is one of the most beloved portrayals of a superhero in the current era, rivaled only perhaps by RDJ's Iron Man, and I feel like this was a recipe for big money. The question remains though, how would Deadpool fare once Disney got added into the kitchen? Needless to say, both my wife and I were apprehensive that the knobs would get turned down on the violence and the raunchy humor to keep things kosher as a Disney product. However, the trailers for the movie seemed to assuage those fears, so we went into the theater with high hopes. The result was, well, a bit complicated. As someone just starting out on YouTube, I have a strong feeling this opinion is going to get me raked, but I was mostly disappointed in the film aside from the few scenes where Hugh Jackman proved the width and breadth of his acting prowess. For now, I'm just going to say it wasn't quite what I was expecting, and I want to try to articulate why. Before I launch into my review, I want to state a few things up front. First, spoilers. I'm going to spoil the whole thing if you haven't watched it, so you've been warned. Second, the standard response that some are going to give to my critiques of the film are, "This is a parody, it's not meant to be taken seriously." To this, I would respond that labeling something a parody does not mean it gets a free pass for being poorly constructed or executed. Parody is not a genre that comes with a huge sign proclaiming that we should abandon all logic, ye who enter here. The first two Deadpool movies are parodies and did not have nearly the amount of problems this film did in terms of plot, execution, and overall use of time. I find the reductive call to its status as a parody to be a lame defense, as well as an attempt to reduce the overall effectiveness of the first two Deadpool movies in terms of being funny and heartfelt while also telling a coherent story. It is possible to do all of that at the same time. Furthermore, this film did try to do all of it and utterly failed, and I think labeling it a parody as a means of protecting it from scrutiny is a weak argument. Long story long, I get that people want it to be a ha-ha film and to not think too hard about the ha-ha film. Sorry, I thought too hard about the ha-ha film. If you don't like people who think too hard about ha-ha films, it's best you take your ball and go home now before I piss you off. Lastly, I will fully acknowledge here that it is possible to recognize all the problems with this film and still enjoy it, and if you did, I truly envy you. I have a whole list of films that I enjoy that I know are broken as all hell. I think that the happy medium between recognizing a film is constructed poorly and being able to accept the fun bits partially depends on your expectations. I understand that there exists in this world a large swath of people who think the Deadpool movies are not meant to be taken seriously and only watch them for the dirty jokes and violence. I think those people might be completely satisfied with this film, to be honest. For myself personally, I enjoyed the first two Deadpool movies because they were able to balance the raunchy humor and hyperviolence with solid character and world development and a plot that made sense working toward an outcome that I was invested in. In short, it was more than just a stabby ha-ha film for me, so I had higher expectations of this movie. Alright, all that said, I'm going to cover four main aspects of the film: the characters, the humor, the fight scenes, and the overall plot. Everything is going to be rated on a 10-point scale, and I'll quickly run down what each point on the scale represents. 10 is excellent, 9 is great, 8 is good, 7 is fair, 6 is just above average, 5 is just below average, 4 is poor, 3 is bad, 2 is terrible, and 1 is dumpster fire. If there happens to be anyone curious as to why I've verbally labeled the scale, I'd be happy to explain that in the future, but I'll spare the rest of you for now on the assumption you might already know or simply don't care. Now, with all that said,
and here we go.
Part 1. Characters. There are quite a few characters in this film depending on how one wants to look at it, so I'm going to limit this section to 3.5. I say half because I'm going to lump the two antagonists together. Why? Because one is frankly worthless, but the film still needs them to do some significant things to move portions forward. Thus, I don't want to just ignore them. So I will cover the pair of antagonists, Paradox and Cassandra Nova, as well as the two protagonists, Deadpool and Wolverine. For each character, I'm going to look at 3 primary factors. First is motivation, and to address this, I'm going to use 2 questions. How did they get this way, and why are they doing what they're doing? In general, if a character is written well, the answer to these 2 questions should be linked. To give an example from another Deadpool movie, how did Cable get the way he is? Because Russell killed his family. Why is Cable doing what he's doing? Same answer with the addition of he's trying to undo what Russell did to his family. Thus, these 2 questions can generally provide a good metric for framing character motivation. The second factor I'm going to look at is about their plan for achieving their motivation. In other words, what are the things they actually do to go about addressing their motivation? Finally, I'm going to look at characterization as defined by speech, actions, and overall presence of the actor bringing the character to life. With that said, let's start with Paradox. Paradox, in probably the simplest terms, is middle management in the TVA. For those not sure what the TVA is, welcome to Disney Marvel. You must consume all the products, so have fun being tortured with that. I guess Loki Season 1 is where you would need to go for that answer, so shoot. So how did Paradox get the way he is? Because he's middle management and he wants to show the higher-ups that he has a better way of doing things. Why is he doing what he's doing? Same basic reason. He's a stereotypical stuffy middle management guy with aspirations of glorious promotion. It's exactly as lame as it sounds and completely forgettable. Alright, but what is his plan? This is where things get really muddy. From what I understood, he needed to pull Wade out of his timeline because Wade's timeline was about to collapse because it lost its anchor being, namely Wolverine, back when he died in the Logan film. Here's what I did not understand, and maybe someone can clear this up for me. Paradox pulls Wade in, explains all of this, seems to indicate that Wade needed to be pulled out of his timeline because it was mandated by some higher-ups, then Paradox gives Wade a new outfit and tells him he can be important, then explains his, meaning Paradox's, whole plans for rising up the management structure. But I still don't understand what Wade was meant to do at that point if he didn't end up headbutting Paradox and stealing his time warpy phone thing. Why did he explain this whole plan to Wade? What did he want Wade to do? Were they supposed to be in cahoots on this plan? Did he need Wade for something? I don't see the reason for even telling Wade any of this. Additionally, it did seem that pulling Wade out was an order of sorts, which seems to indicate that the TVA upper management had some reason for pulling him out. If they didn't and Paradox pulled him out without permission, wouldn't that have set off alarms in the rest of the TVA? If Wade was important, wouldn't it also have sent off alarms when Paradox sent him off to the void? He was meant to be crucial to the sacred timeline now, no? In the end, the TVA is an entire ball of bullshit, and all the rules and ideas tied to it are just a ridiculous mess. So how does Paradox go about achieving his motivation? Well, he has a magic MacGuffin machine known as the Time Ripper built to prune Wade's timeline ahead of schedule. Lo and behold, Wade doesn't like this idea and the rest of the film kicks off. Finally, addressing the characterization. Nothing the character says is memorable, his lines and actions and overall presence in the film is completely forgettable. He's just there to be the stuffy middle management character. The actor pulls off that obnoxious character well enough, so I can't say it's his lack of talent that makes the character so forgettable, but whatever talent he might have does not stand out in this guy. He's just a whole bucket of meh. So the ratings for Paradox, he gets a 1 for motivation, he gets a 1 for his plan, and I'll be nice to the actor and give him a nice shiny 2 for characterization. The character was terrible, and most of that can be tied to the insipid idea of using the TVA in the first place. Moving on to Cassandra Nova. To those unaware, as I was, she is apparently Charles Xavier's twin sister that he killed in the womb because he sensed the evil in her. So in other words, he kinda Luke Skywalkered her. Ugh, it pains me that that's an association we can make now. Thank you, Disney Star Wars. So how did she get this way? Well, that line above is about all she gives you in this film to understand that, and it's said so quickly that many might miss it. She was a stillbirth that died in the womb, but somehow got sent to the void and was allowed to grow up? I don't know. I am of the mind that films should be able to construct a narrative without knowledge from outside media, and while I am sure that reading the comics might answer this for me, in the film it is glossed over in less than a minute, so one is left to just accept this without thinking too hard about it. She was killed in the womb and is now a grown woman in the void. So why is she doing what she's doing? Because she wants to be the queen of the void. The establishment of the character and her motivation were again extremely weak. I don't really understand who this is and why she would choose, of all things, to become the ruler of what amounts to purgatory. Ultimately, though, what really drives the motivation down is what she then does to execute this plan. One of the largest problems at the outset was in choosing this type of character for Deadpool and Wolverine to fight because, as the evil, murderous variant of Professor X, there is no way in God's green earth Deadpool and Wolverine pose even a 1% threat to her. One of the very first things she does is literally rip the skin off of Johnny Storm from the Fantastic Four, reducing him to a puddle of blood and bones in the snap of a finger. She is far beyond the power level of anyone else in the movie. The only way they can pose a threat to her is for her to turn her murderous psychopathic nature off for a few seconds when the plot needs DP and Wolvie to escape. And she does this twice. So how does she go about achieving her motivation of becoming the Queen of the Void? By forcing everyone in the Void to either become her henchmen, outright murdering them, or leaving them to be devoured by Puff the Purple Fart Poodle. Credit to Shad and Nerdrotic on EFAP episode 146 about Loki season 1 for that name. It was pretty good. Seriously though, does that dragon have the capability to approach from any other vector than like straight at Giant Man's head? Here's the problem with how she executes the plan though. She is 100% a murderous rage loony for nearly every second of the film except when the plot needed Wolverine to have a character moment. She says, thrice in the span of minutes, that if DP and Wolverine take Juggernaut's helmet off of her, she will, with great glee, murder the absolute shite out of both of them the second it's off. And there is not a single doubt that she means it wholeheartedly. Then Wolverine has his speech about why they need to let her go, so they take the helmet off, and this BS works. Okay, fine. If we want to let this BS work, I can roll with that. What I can't roll with is that quite literally 2 minutes later, when she realizes what Paradox's plan was, she jumps through another sling ring hole to pop up right where she just let Deadpool and Wolverine escape to, yeets them off in the distance, and goes to destroy the world. So we have one dime turn, then another about-face dime turn within mere moments. Additionally, Cassandra would have absolutely recognized that if anyone was going to screw up her plan, it was these two nitwits, and instead of yeeting them off, she would have certainly murdered them the moment she walked through the hole. Why doesn't she? Because we need another fan masturbation moment where Deadpool and Wolverine fight all the other Deadpools. This is the problem with using a character this far out of the power balance from the heroes. It makes no sense when they have the power to end someone and just don't because, yeah, we need another CG fight with someone else. Similarly, it makes no sense that she just sat down and let her henchmen take on the Cameo Brigade in the battle scene leading up to her making the sling ring hole for the heroes. She could have yeeted all of them out of existence at any moment and saved some of her henchmen from dying. Not that she cares about the henchmen really, but letting them die reduces her resources for no real reason other than the movie needed the cameo characters to have a badass moment. Taken together, her motivation is terribly set up and her whole plan is equally bad given what she does to execute it. Thus, for motivation and plan, she gets a 1 for both. Now, the one area where she starkly contrasts with Paradox is in characterization. Emma Corrin, the English actress who portrayed Cassandra Nova, did an absolutely remarkable job bringing the character to life. The way that Emma simply stood in some shots, despite being rail thin and quite slight, still managed to come off intimidating. Furthermore, the way Emma used various expressions to convey a wide range of emotions was truly impressive. You could almost feel what was going through her mind even before she started speaking. Cassandra Nova was absolutely menacing. It came across in the way she walked, the way she talked, and in every movement she made. The whole fingers and the brain thing got to be a bit much, but the actress brought her A game without doubt. So for characterization, Cassandra Nova gets a 9. Alright, so the two antagonists managed 1s for both motivation and planning, and Cassandra Nova gets a 9 for characterization. Taken together, that results in a 1 for Paradox and a 3.5 for Cassandra Nova. Moving on to our protagonists, I'll start with Deadpool. So how did Wade get this way? I'll have to lead in by saying this was the part of the movie that angered me the most. Wade begins the movie by using Cable's time device to travel to the MCU's main timeline, and he goes in to apply to be an Avenger. He is rejected, and this rejection sends him into a spiral of depression that ultimately destroys his relationship with Vanessa. He then decides he's gonna go give up being Deadpool and become a car salesman. He staples a toupee to his head, and yeah, proceeds to be lame for entirely too long. This whole portion of the movie was complete shit, and it does a lot of damage to both Wade and Vanessa's characters for a compilation of scenes that were not funny. First, I would like to point out that we spent 2 movies with Wade where his stance on team-ups with superheroes was clearly stated repeatedly. The entire point of Colossus in DP1 and 2 was to try and recruit Deadpool into the X-Men, and he consistently refused because he's not a hero, and had no interest in becoming one. Then, for no real clear reason, he now wants to be an Avenger? This makes no sense. Furthermore, being rejected sending him into a depression also makes no sense. This depression being strong enough to push Vanessa away also made no sense. She refused to give up on him when he got cancer and even accepted him and his fugly face. You know, the one that looked like Freddy Krueger fucked a topographical map of Utah? That face? She, being hotter than the goddamn sun, accepted that fugly mug? But sad about not being an Avenger? That's a bridge too far. Oh, fuck off. She wasn't just gonna give up on him like that. They also tried to make Vanessa into some kind of office worker type who would talk about promotions at work and dating some dude with the most middle-of-the-road soy boy name. I don't know which character assassination I hated more, Wade's or Vanessa's. That was not our girl, though, and I want justice for Morena. She was one of my favorite actresses, and I loved Vanessa, but this movie ruined her. My wife's comment was something along the lines of, a woman who has sex for money and enjoys pegging her boyfriend, moving on to becoming an office worker. That's very Disney.
Ruh-roh.
The real bitch of this is, it wasn't necessary. The next part of his motivation, why is he doing what he's doing, actually works better if they don't do this. His whole mission in the film is to replace Logan in his timeline so that his timeline doesn't disappear, and he wants to do this because of the small group of people he considers to be his whole world. No part of him breaking up with Vanessa and giving up being Deadpool actually adds to that. In fact, I would argue, a better start to the film would have been to continue the let's make a baby storyline between him and Vanessa from the previous movie. Have her finally get pregnant, make the party about revealing that, and then he gets nabbed by the TVA. Now he really has a reason to not let his timeline get erased. Long story long, Deadpool gets a 1 for how did he get this way and a 1 for why is he doing what he's doing. That first section really does just suck, and it's all in the name of adding in some weak tie to the MCU. Moreover, they pulled the move I hate most where they destroy a relationship off screen for no real reason. I find this kind of shit unforgivable and lazy writing. They wanted and needed some drama point to kick off from and maybe a way to reduce Morena's screen time, so they did the whole, the love story you were invested in for 2 movies is broken now for a lame reason and we're gonna try to fix it by the end. Bullshit that is just lazy writing. Also, to be clear, I gave him a 1 for why is he doing what he's doing because of how utterly broken his family is now, and the only real reason we as an audience care about them has nothing to do with this movie. They are hoping you still remember and care about them before, and that is also lazy writing, and on top of the fact that they're hoping you don't really remember the entire family, but only the part they're showing you. Deadpool 1 built up the relationship between Wade and Vanessa so that you cared about him trying to save her. In Deadpool 2, it wasn't strictly about saving her, it was about him learning to care about something more than himself. Killing her at the beginning hurt because we were invested in a relationship that they portrayed as having progressed forward. Had they portrayed it as broken and weird in those opening scenes of the second movie, the emotion of killing her would have been lessened. By twisting Wade's relationship with his quote-unquote family, not to mention just removing a bunch of them without mention, makes this much less impactful. So how does Wade go about achieving his motivation? He uses the TVA time warpy phone thingy to go looking for a Logan to fix his timeline. Now, it's been noted by some that he can actually travel through both time and space with that device, and he could have gone back to the Fox timeline before the Logan film to get a living version of the Logan from the timeline we knew him in. In fact, it should also be noted that Wade did in fact have to travel forward in time from where he was to even get to that Logan. If you don't believe me, just check the wiki for the Logan film. The first line of the plot description tells you it takes place in 2029. Yeah, that's 5 years from now. But this is more details than we can reasonably expect Disney Marvel to keep in their heads, so we'll leave that alone for now. However, while I do think it could have been possible to get a Wolverine from the Fox timeline, I think the goal, or perhaps the hope would be the better word, was to not interfere with that Logan and leave the arc of his storyline alone. However, whatever protection they were offering gets quickly undermined when we have to accept that Deadpool then uses his literal corpse to beat down some TVA agents. Fun. The The concept of going to find the worst version of Logan was intriguing as well, but I think they went less than halfway with that. Considering the vastness of all the possible timelines, I have a hard time believing that this was the worst Wolverine. The version he did get works on some level for me though, because I think the version of Logan they used serves as a good reflection of Deadpool. He's the I'm not a hero type, as well as the I never wanted to be an X-Man. Thus, he shares a lot in common with Deadpool's whole mantra from the first two films. In other words, I think it works to have a broken version of Logan, not only because he serves as an alternate lens to view Deadpool through, but it also gives him more room to constantly drop F-bombs and be more hyper-violent without tainting the memory of the Fox timeline Logan. I'm saying all this while knowing they still did massive damage to the Fox timeline Logan, not only by using his corpse, but also including X-23 as a means of milking out some emotion from the story, but trying to pull that apart would make this review endless. So Deadpool's method of addressing his conflict in the film was a mixed bag. In the end, this can primarily be attributed to the core problem of incorporating time and space travel in the first place. Thus, while I agree with the decision to use a different Logan, this could not possibly be considered the worst Logan. And there is no way we should assume that bringing back any old Logan would fix the problem of losing the anchor being Logan, and it can't be ignored that the film fails to really give a good reason for this. So Deadpool's plan gets a 2. Finally, for characterization, Deadpool gets a 5. I'm going to point out a few things here. The whole intro was garbage. The car salesman thing was garbage. He got 2 different characters killed, namely Johnny Storm and Nicepool. And yes, I watched the end credit scene where they retcon what happened to Johnny Storm, and no, I don't forgive Deadpool for doing that. And the film was 99% Deadpool and 1% Wade, and that 1% was god-awful. In the end, I really didn't like Deadpool in this movie. He was whiny and obnoxious in a way that wasn't fun or funny, but more annoying than in the first 2 films. All of this just felt like a downgrade of this character, and it came through in some of the really stupid things he does. Both my wife and I walked out feeling like it was someone else pretending to be Deadpool who only seemed to get it right about 50% of the time. Thus, he gets a 5. So Deadpool gets a 1 for motivation, a 2 for the enactment of his plan, and a 5 for characterization for a grand total of 2.5. Finally, we have Wolverine. As I said at the outset, few actors have become tied to a character in the mind of the public like Hugh Jackman's portrayal of Wolverine. I honestly feel bad for whoever tries to take on the role next because Hugh has set the bar so incredibly high. The first question is though, as I noted, this is not the Wolverine we know from the Fox films, so how did this Wolverine get this way? Well, we need to establish that this, according to the film, is the worst version of Wolverine across all of the possible timelines. Why is he the worst? Apparently because he went out on a drinking bender one night and it just so happened that that was the night the humans showed up and killed all the other X-Men. This then sent him on a murderous rampage where he killed lots of people, both good and bad. Now all of his friends being dead, and more importantly all the X-Men we knew from the other films, is a legitimate reason to be a bit broken. However, it would have worked slightly better if Logan's role in their death had been a bit more of an active decision rather than a passive coincidence. I imagine this like a police officer. They are off duty one night, they go out on a bender, which they're allowed to do on their own time, and that night a large incident occurs and a lot of their friends die. Will they be traumatized by that? Likely, but I don't know that they'll spend the rest of their lives blaming themselves for it. Just to give an example of how you could change this. Say the X-Men get called out on a mission that seems a bit low level, but they ask Logan to come along and he refuses. He tells them all to go blow because he wants to go get drunk. He does so, only to find out that the mission ended in failure and a bunch of mutants get killed. He gets angry then and goes on a killing rampage as vengeance, and his rampage leads to more mutants getting killed, including Xavier, and the X-Men are disbanded. I think that gives him more reason to blame himself than just, I picked the wrong night to go drinking, but I had no idea that would be the night someone would show up and, murder everybody. It strikes me as a bit too coincidental. Nevertheless, this is more of a nitpick. When we look at why is he doing what he's doing, well that leads into what DP tells him at the end of the first fight. They might be able to undo the disaster from his timeline. We cannot assess this without knowing, if we know anything about the TVA, that they are not going to undo shit. That isn't how the rules work. Thus, this can only work if we put ourselves into Logan's brain and believe this might be possible. Furthermore, it definitely doesn't happen, meaning his world isn't fixed, and it's all because the X-Men being slaughtered and Logan going on a murderous rampage had to happen to make him the hero he is now. There is a line of thinking that goes, all the mistakes of your life have brought you to this moment, and in a sense, the person you have become is a result of how you process those mistakes. The problem is, this film is set in a world where time and space can actually be altered, which punches a hole in the entire meaning of that statement. In the end, it just felt lazy and made Logan's motivation pointless because he's trapped in DP's timeline now and all of his friends are still dead. Thus, overall, I would give Logan's motivation a 4. I wanted more out of his backstory. The backstory should have been a bit darker with more agency in why it was so dark and a clearer path for him to actually achieve something to address his motivation, like Cable had in the previous film. Now, his goal as the movie progresses is to try and reach the TVA in the hopes of going back in time and fixing his world. We, the tortured few who have watched Loki Season 1, know that this isn't possible. If they change something like that, alarms will go off and things will have to be put back and they'll probably make another Kang, which that's just not going to be good. However, Deadpool and Wolverine don't know this, so we're meant to play along. This is the problem using the TVA. If you know their stupid rules, you should have to play by them. But whatever, let's just stick to Wolverine. So he goes about achieving his motivation by murdering anything in his way, then deciding he doesn't want to play for a minute because it's time for the second act low point, and also to allow him to have a slow motion reveal in Act 3 Part 1. Yeah, I'm being a bit snarky here, but as I said in the previous section, we know his true motivation is not going to be addressed, so it's pointless either way. He wants to fix his world. That isn't possible and won't be done, so he's on a fruitless mission. So this gets a 2. Now, some will try and highlight the second chance theme the film wants to push. So Logan's real motivation was to get a second chance to be an X-Man. But that is the film's motivation, not Logan's motivation. Finally, characterization. Hugh Jackman still has it, and he really brought it in this film. I would argue that, in order of presence, the only 3 true actors in this film were Hugh Jackman, Emma Corrin, and Wesley Snipes. They were all great, I mean no offense, but what Ryan Reynolds is doing isn't acting, it's just turning his personality up to full volume. Getting back to Hugh, there are 2 scenes that really stood out to me. First, the cursing rant he goes on in the car after Deadpool's educated hope line.
Motherfucker, I wish I could say you die alone, but it's one of God's best jokes that you can't die, except it's on all of us!
And the way he rips into him, you could feel the rage rolling off of Hugh through that whole scene. His face, his voice, the tension in his body, all of it gave that speech a real weight. When Deadpool goes dead silent after that and lets the moment sit, you can tell it was one of the few times someone's insults of him had actually really hurt, thus the "we're going to fight now" line. He didn't have any way of countering what Logan said, and Hugh really nailed that scene. I also really liked the emotion he brought to the fire scene from the preview and then the headspace scenes with Cassandra, but the second scene that really clenched it for me was his whole speech about Xavier and why he didn't want to kill Cassandra. In the end, Hugh Jackman proved again why he was such a superb choice to play Wolverine, and he nailed it. 10. So Wolverine got a 4 for motivation, a 2 for execution of his plan, and a 10 for characterization. Thus, his final score is 5.3. The final thing I will say about the characters before I move on is in regards to the slew of cameos in this film. Some of them I loved, some of them I didn't really care about, and most of them will not age well because they are hyper-focused on the current moment in time. So to quickly run through the ones I remember. 1. Henry Cavill as Wolverine. I'm going to give this a 5. I love everything about Henry Cavill. He is a hero in nerd culture and he deserves to be respected. However, this will not age well unless they actually let him play Wolverine, which they won't. So it's just a moment to go, woo! 2. Chris Evans as Johnny Storm. This gets a 2. I enjoyed the trick they played with this and that they gave a nod to the OG Fantastic Four. Even though that movie is not very good, I did like it. However, they make him completely useless. Let him get hit in the nuts, then strip his skin off of him. This was maximum disrespect as far as I'm concerned. Number 3, Jennifer Gardner as Elektra. I give this a 3. I don't mind her. I actually like Jennifer Gardner as an actress, but the movie she came from was god-awful, and I would have preferred a long list of other potential characters over her, like, Ghost Rider or something. But I'm guessing they took her because she was cheaper. 4, Channing Tatum as Gambit. 1. Stop it. Just stop it. Oh, God, the fucking accent. What the hell was the whole sperm what's up doc shit? Why did everyone in this film start talking like Deadpool? That is not Remy LeBeau, and Channing Tatum just needs to go back to Magic Mike, you worthless sack of shit. 5. Wesley Snipes as Blade. I give that one a 10. He is the only Blade, and Wesley still has the moves. Love the character, and I love the original movies, so I was happy to see him back. Number 6. All the other Deadpools. I'm giving this a 1. I don't care, and this battle scene was a waste of time. I will get to that later. P.S. The fact that we got slow-mo dog pool 3 times was annoying. This is one of my pet peeves with Ryan's mode of humor. Sometimes he finds an unfunny joke and then will hammer you with it repeatedly, and it really grates when the joke didn't work the first time and now you're on round freaking 3. Just stop! Number 7. There are more, like Toad, Last Stand's version of Juggernaut, but not the same actor, and Sabretooth from X-Men 1, but 2 of them die so quickly it isn't really worth mentioning. Oh, and Pyro was there, and Lady Deathstrike. Yeah, I don't care because most of them aren't the right actors, they're not the right people, and they just get yeeted all over the place and don't really do anything worth talking about. They're just there to be dead. So, 1. 8. Finally, we're going to talk about who wasn't there. So we have Cable, Domino, Weasel, and Russell, just to name a few. So why aren't these people in the film? Honestly, I feel like this was Ryan Reynolds getting a hold of Disney money and wanting to upgrade his toys, so he spent all his time thinking about Hugh Jackman and the slew of other cheap cameos instead of continuity. I mean, Weasel, I get it's a combination of TJ Miller's legal shit and the feud between him and Ryan Reynolds. They really do apparently hate each other. Well, at least TJ hates Ryan. I don't know how much Ryan actually hates TJ, but the only version of the story we're really getting is from TJ Miller and all of his rants on, like, I think it was Norm Macdonald's podcast, maybe? Something like that. The others, though, I don't understand at all. You paid for Chris Evans, Henry Cavill, and Wesley Snipes. Why not use all that money and bring Josh Brolin back instead? Because Ryan Reynolds wanted to focus on his insane level of homosexual jokes in regard to his love for Hugh Jackman. Yeah, awesome. So the cameos for me get a 2. I get that this is nerd porn. I get that all the nerds loved this. I get that all the people that wanted to see all this kind of goofy shit were probably really happy, but the problem for me is this is nerd porn for nerd porn's sake, not for narrative's sake, not for story's sake, not for anything else, but for people to just go, woo, and have a fap. And to me, this isn't a good thing. This is pandering, and I don't like being pandered to. So with all that said, that brings me to the end of part 1. And we're going to move on to part 2 now. Humor. So dirty jokes are a big part of the whole Deadpool shtick, and this film tried to replicate that. There were a few moments that hit really well for me, but most of them were in the trailers and thus not as funny when seen in the context of the film, such as this one.
Control, then full mount, and you ground and pound till he makes no sound because he's dead.
Shut the fuck up. Oh my god.
All in all, I was far more disappointed in the humor in this film, to be honest. There were far too many scenes where the jokes weren't landing and they just kept coming, which made it feel like a fireworks show where you never get that satisfying pop, just the whistling sound over and over again and no payoff. Part of this might be that I was watching it in Japan, where it absolutely is against culture to react in a movie theater, so without the rest of the people in the theater reacting, it just felt really awkward. But still, if you need other people to laugh to make you laugh, I think that's a signal that the joke wasn't funny enough to laugh at to begin with. So I'll go through some of the scenes that I felt didn't work well. The first thing that disappointed me more than I thought it would was the opening credits. The second that the regular credits started to roll through, I knew this was going to be a Disney product. Anyone familiar with Deadpool should know that those films did not have conventional credits, and it was one of the many charms of the films. Another one of those little things that stood it apart from the rest of the superhero genre films. But this movie is big budget Disney corporate slop, so we need to know who shoveled the horse shit, when, where, and why, so they can all go wank themselves when this makes $1 billion. It was sad, and a bad sign to start things off. Then we have the extended scene with Happy Hogan. I am personally not a fan of Jon Favreau, and I think he should have been put in the stocks and left there until the collective memory of Lion King 2019 was erased from the public's memory. But alas, that film also made over $1 billion, and that is the metric for success nowadays, so he gets paraded out like he isn't part of the problem. My own personal dislike of the man aside, this scene is far too long, too unfunny, and works to completely undo Wade as a character. I mean, Wade just looks sad and pathetic and desperate, and that's not Wade. I didn't laugh once through the whole sequence, and it felt like it was trying really hard to be funny. The smasturbating line didn't land, the parallel parking line didn't land. It was, in Deadpool's own words from later in the film, miss after miss after miss, just a lame, unfunny sequence. Then we move into the whole sequence of Wade being a car salesman and stapling a toupee to his head. I don't care about the Honda Odyssey, and this whole sequence was, again, a string of jokes that didn't land and went on for far too long. Another scene that bothered me was the bit when Johnny Storm got killed. As I said before, I get that they retcon this in the credits, but the problem is that the film lets you sit with it through the whole runtime just thinking Deadpool is an absolute asshole that got Johnny killed on purpose. Even if Johnny did say those things though, which it turns out the film wants you to believe he did, Wade still didn't need to say all that shit. At that moment, I was not laughing. I was thinking, Deadpool is a dick, and I hope Cassandra kills him. Moving a bit forward then, we get the slow-mo approach of Dogpool, the first of 3 scenes with a dog that they were really trying to push as funny and nice pool. This went on for a really, really long time, and none of the jokes were funny. This whole sequence is so unfunny that the only thing I remember from it was that Nice Pool seems to admit to being a bad pet owner, and whatever. Then, a little bit on from that, there is the whole exchange between the Cameo Brigade when Deadpool is trying to convince them to invade Cassandra's fortress. I recall this moment in my mind because it was a lot of back and forth, and I can remember feeling like moments of it were meant to be funny, but it just felt like it was going on for too long and the exchanges were awkward and none of the jokes were landing. They had a bunch of meme lines like "let the man cook," and then Wolverine says "you're all gonna die," and Deadpool shouts something like "raid the room," and I remember shaking my head thinking they tried so hard to make all of that funny and I did not laugh once. Furthermore, whatever might have been funny there is going to age like milk when the hip meme lines they used are not popular anymore. The other scene that I found was trying too hard and didn't hit was the whole sequence where Deadpool is on the other side of the antimatter door doing the stupid stare miming bit. This reminded me of the death scene at the end of DP2, which I also felt went on a few jokes too long. This might just be me, and I could admit that, but I don't like it when you get to a peak emotional scene and then the movie completely subverts the moment with a long string of jokes. One joke or two is one thing. A whole long drawn out sequence starts to irritate me for a while. It becomes that whole cringe comedy thing, and that's not really something that I enjoy, so I admit that that's a personal thing. Finally, and for me most importantly, was the line Deadpool gives about multiverse movies being miss after miss. Here's the problem, and I will have to acknowledge the gentleman from EFAP for articulating this in a way that my brain was struggling to frame. The problem with the joke is that it's insincere. Phase 4 and 5 are considered to be part of the multiverse saga, and there have been 10 total films released in that time frame. Now each of these engages with the multiverse on different levels, but 5 out of the 10 were financially successful. 2 of which, and possibly the 2 that dealt with the multiverse most heavily, were the most financially successful of their Phase 4 and 5 films. Namely Spider-Man No Way Home and Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. Moreover, the reason the TVA was added into this film was due most assuredly to the fact that Loki was possibly the only show Disney Marvel made that seemed to have been positively engaged with, thus the only one that also got a season 2. Therefore, the question you have to ask yourself is this: do you think that Disney really believes the multiverse has been miss after miss? And moreover, do you think that Disney, if they did know that, are going to stop doing it? The answer to both of those, judging by this film itself, has to be no. They don't believe that multiverses are a miss, because if they did, they would not have put it into this movie. The line is not mocking multiverses. The line is mocking you. If you liked it, meaning the line, that is Disney literally mocking you by giving you a line to clap at while they are literally doing the thing that you don't like. It's insincere, and far from making me laugh, it made me angry. So overall, I gave the humor in this film a 2. Compared to the first 2 Deadpool movies, which I rewatched before going to see this and absolutely laughed my ass off, this film was painfully unfunny in several spots, and I think many of the jokes will only get worse over time. And with that said, that brings us to the end of part 2. We're going to move on to part 3, fight scenes. The first thing to say is that there definitely were some really cool moments in the fight scenes between Deadpool and Wolverine. The car fight in particular was really awesome, and I really liked the way that they used the space, and the choreography of the fight was actually really cool. The violence was generally on par with the first 2 films as well, if toned down a bit in spots, but was much more than I expected from Disney. Still, here again, there were a few issues to highlight. The first problem I had was that the fight scenes in the first 2 Deadpool movies always served a narrative purpose. For example, in Deadpool 1 we have the highway fight scene, the montage of Deadpool killing all of Ajax's cronies to try and find him, the fight in the fire between DP and Ajax, and then the final fight. Each one of these scenes served a narrative purpose. The montage of killing Ajax's cronies led up to the highway fight, which was all serving the purpose of finding Ajax. The fight in the fire is right after Wade escapes from Ajax's suffocating machine and he is trying to kill him for what he did. Then, obviously, the final fight scene is to resolve the conflict of the film, namely, Deadpool incapacitating Ajax to force him to fix his face, which Ajax admits he can't do, and then Deadpool kills him. So each fight had a purpose in the story that served the narrative. In Deadpool 2, we have the intro montage of killing the mobsters and drug dealers, the fight in the prison with Cable, the fight on the truck with Cable, and then the final fight with Juggernaut and Fire Fist as the finale. The intro montage is setting up both an explanation of what Deadpool chose to do with his time after the conclusion of Deadpool 1, as well as the catalyst for what gets Vanessa killed. In other words, the one mobster he fails to kill is the one that shoots Vanessa. The prison fight introduces Cable, as well as the plotline of Cable wanting to kill Russell, but also helps Deadpool to understand what Vanessa meant in the dream world about his heart not being in the right place. Deadpool needed to understand that Russell was in danger and that he needed to help him. The truck scene then is about protecting Russell, as well as raising the stakes for the finale by having Juggernaut show up as a consequence of how Deadpool treated Russell previously. In the finale, as much as Juggernaut was fan service, it creates a real threat that pushes Cable and Deadpool together, and this fight helps bring the narrative to a close. Again, each fight had a narrative purpose in the story. Okay, so Deadpool 3. We have the Bye 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 montage with Logan's corpse, Deadpool vs. Wolverine Part 1, Deadpool vs. Wolverine Part 2, the Cameo Brigade vs. Cassandra's cronies, and Deadpool and Wolverine vs. all the other Deadpools. First off, the opening montage only serves as a meme joke. Disney is raping corpses and let's have some hyperviolence. Also, it's lame when one realizes that the TVA easily captured Loki and somehow can't capture Deadpool. Give me a break. Moreover, it serves no narrative purpose. It's just there to be violent and funny, and I did not like the idea of using Logan's corpse like that. But I can see that this is me taking this particular moment too personally. Fight 2. The first between Deadpool and Wolverine, again, served no narrative purpose. It was, in fact, just as Deadpool says in his fourth wall break, a moment for the nerds to take out their socks and have a wank to. Wolverine decides he wants to kill Deadpool so they fight. The fight only ends when Deadpool mentions the TVA could undo the problems in Wolverine's world. There is no reason they needed to fight to get that out, and that is all that is really gained from this other than the fan service. Fight 3. The second Deadpool and Wolverine fight. Again, served no narrative purpose. It was just there to do it again. They literally fight each other to a standoff, pass out, and the next 23 shows up to drive them to their next plot destination. Thus, there is no narrative reason for this to happen. It just happened for the nerds to fap again. Fight 4. Again, was another fat fest, but at least this was attempting to be narratively important, so I do need to give them credit for that. They needed this fight to get the helmet to put on Cassandra's head to get Wolverine and Deadpool out of the void. The problem is that all they really did it for was to splash a bunch of choppy camera work where each of the Cameo Brigade get to have their badass moment. I mean, here's the problem. 1, the fight is only allowed to occur because Cassandra decides she doesn't want to yeet these people into the sun while they're driving up. 2, the Cameo Brigade would not have stood a chance. I mean, I love Blade, but I'm sorry. Blade, Elektra, Gambit, and X-23 are no match for Lady Deathstrike, Juggernaut, Azazel, and Pyro. Not to mention all the other randos that are hanging out there with that crew. The Cameo Brigade was only allowed to look cool because the film wanted them to look cool. That would have been, to be honest, an utter ass-whooping, just not in the direction that the film told you it was. Finally, fight number 5, with all the other Deadpools. Again, this was just fan service. Cassandra did not need their help or support. When she came through the portal, she could have just yeeted them into space, or reduced them down to atoms, or pulled their bodies limb from limb. Yeah, they'll regenerate, but not fast enough to stop her. She could have done a million other things than what she did do, is the point. She only walked off and let the other Deadpools in for the fan service moment. So again, not a narrative decision, but rather a fan fapping decision, which seems to be a theme in this film. So of the 5 fights in the film, only one of them was narratively important. The car fight was cool, and there were moments in the first DP Wolverine fight that were fun, but most of it just felt like pandering. I also didn't like Wolverine's crawl run thing. It was lame when they made Liev Schreiber do this as Sabretooth in the Wolverine Origins movie, so I don't know why they tried to imitate that and bring it back. Although, I guess I might point out that the whole point of Liev Schreiber's character in the Wolverine's Origin movie was to make Wolverine more feral, and maybe they were trying to say he's doing it because this version of Wolverine is more feral? Maybe? I don't know. Lastly, as has been the case with several of the Phase 4 and 5 projects coming out of Marvel, the CGI was dreadful in spots. For example, the way the bones looked in the opening credits, the way they rendered Wolverine when he burst out of the bus at the end of the fight, good god. And Wolverine's mask also didn't track in several scenes as well, so this just reeked of a rush job that should have been given more time. All in all, I'm going to give the fight scenes a 3. Given the expectations I had from the first 2 Deadpool movies, all the fighting in this felt more choppy and forced, like they were just hoping everyone would see the violence and the cameos and that would be enough. Unfortunately, it wasn't for me. And that brings us to the end of part 3, so we're on to part 4, the plot. Alright, so I've covered a lot of the plot already in the other sections, so I'm just going to briefly break this down by the acts in the film. Act 1. Deadpool wants to be an Avenger, gets rejected and depressed, so he and Vanessa break up. But a few quick questions. When exactly in the MCU timeline is Deadpool talking to Happy? Is Tony dead already? I mean, there's a lot of Iron Man iconography all throughout that office, which makes sense because it is Happy, but at the same time, Deadpool refers to the big man, and I'm assuming that's Tony, but this isn't clear. Is Tony dead? Is Tony alive? Like, what is the actual timeline here? Also, why would Deadpool be aware of Thor and that whole crying moment? The Avengers aren't a thing in his timeline, so why does he know any of this? Moving back to the story. The TVA show up, grab him, tell him he'll be important to the sacred timeline, but that his timeline is going to be erased because Logan died. He doesn't like this, so he grabs a TVA pad and goes off to find a Logan to replace the dead Logan. He returns with the worst Logan and is yeeted off to the void. I'm giving this act a 1 because they destroyed Wade's character, they destroyed Vanessa's character, and they also insinuated that Logan's choice to sacrifice himself at the end of Logan meant that everyone in that universe, including X-23, was now doomed to die, and then they desecrated Logan's corpse. Finally, the TVA were in it. The TVA are a pox on all things. Act 2. DP and Wolverine fight in the void. Johnny Storm shows up along with a bunch of the villains from the other X-Men movies. They take them to meet Cassandra Nova. She fiddles with Wade's brain and then tells them she's going to feed them to Puff the purple fart poodle. But the heroes hop on a Sentinel boot and fly off. They wander about, meet Dogpool and Nicepool, get a car and have a fight. X-23 shows up and then takes them off to meet the Cameo Brigade, and they all, stupidly, decide they are going to go back to Cassandra's fort. But Wolverine says, nah. He goes off to the fire to have a bit of a manly cry, and then gets a pep talk from X-23, who he met about an hour ago. This act gets a 2. First, I hate what happened to Johnny Storm. Second, Cassandra was just too powerful to use as a villain, and the mechanics of Puff the Purple Fart Poodle make no sense. The wandering in the bit with Nicepool goes on for far too long, and the whole concept and selection of the Cameo Brigade is a bit lame. Blade is the only one that I felt positive about. I hate the Elektra movie. I absolutely hate Channing Tatum, and there is no way that it makes sense for this group to stand a chance fighting Cassandra Nova. The only bright sides to this bit was the actress playing Cassandra Nova being excellent, and the car fight was pretty cool. Act 3.1. The Cameo Brigade goes off to fight. Cassandra decides to sit it out, so the Cameo Brigade is allowed to do some badassery. Wolverine gets his mind probed, then DP gets Juggernaut's helmet on Cassandra. She says, "I'll kill you," several times, gets shot by Pyro. Yes, shot. With a gun. By a mutant. With the power to command fire. A gun. Anyways, Wolverine knocks Pyro out, and then says some emotional stuff about Charles Xavier and wanting to do what Chuck would want. This is just weepy enough to make Cassandra pull out a sling ring from the Doctor Strange world and open up a portal to let them escape. This act gets a 1. First, the fight only takes place because Cassandra sits it out and because all the villains were nerfed. Second, Cassandra says at the start that she was strangled to death before birth, and the narrative for this is that she and Charles Xavier were twins sharing a womb and that he himself killed her because he sensed how evil she was. Thus, Logan's whole line about Charles would have torn the world apart to save you is, well, a lie, cause Charles is the one that killed her. Cassandra seems to have forgotten at that moment who killed her, and the movie is just hoping the audience will focus on the Xavier we all knew and loved from the previous films and the type of man that he was. Thus, we all believe that Logan is telling the truth when he says Charles would save her, but that is only because the movie purposefully only gave you one line of dialogue to establish who Cassandra Nova is and how she came to be there. Finally, the idea that sling rings can get you in and out of the void is really stupid and only works because, again, Disney is counting on the audience not really thinking too hard about any of this. Act 3.2. Deadpool and Wolverine return to DP's timeline, fall in a car, meet Peter, then head off to save the timeline. Cassandra interrogates Pyro to find out why he tried to kill her and learns about Paradox's plan. She shows up right where Paradox, DP, and Wolverine are having a conversation using the sling ring again, and yeets the heroes out of the way before digging her fingers into Paradox's brain. She goes off to use the Time Ripper, aka the timeline-destroying MacGuffin of this film, and leaves the sling ring portal open to let all the other Deadpools in. The Deadpools apparently work for Cassandra, so we get another fight. The fight ends when Peter shows up in a Deadpool outfit, and all the alternate DPs decide they don't want to fight anymore. Deadpool and Wolverine go to stop Cassandra, and it turns out it's a matter-antimatter thing that they have to connect, and it will kill whoever does it. Oh no! Wolverine says he's gonna do it. Deadpool tricks him and goes into the room himself. But it turns out he can't do it himself, and Wolverine breaks in and connects the other piece. Lo and behold, it works! Cassandra dies, the heroes live. Wolverine is told his timeline can't and shouldn't be fixed because what happened there is what made him the person he needed to be to save this timeline, and he just shrugs and walks off. We have a party, and Wade and Vanessa chat, seeming to be on the road to fixing their relationship. This act also gets a 1. Cassandra suddenly flipping on a dime from letting them go to being the stereotypical maniacal villain was poorly written and executed, and her whole motivation was nonsensical. Her decision to, again, not pull Deadpool and Wolverine apart limb from limb instead of yeeting them off in the distance and leaving cleanup duty to the other Deadpools was also nonsensical. The Deadpools fight felt like pandering and ended for a stupid reason. Every Deadpool has a Peter! Funny. The use of the matter-antimatter device is such an old trope in fantasy as well, it might as well be the bullshit horseshit device at this point. If you connect the two pieces of shit, lots of shit, ooh. The fact that neither of them died was also lame. Deadpool actually did die for a time at the end of DP2, and that made the sacrifice mean something. The sacrifice in this meant nothing because there were 0 consequences. Furthermore, Wolverine not fighting back against the TVA lady and just accepting her bullshit line is also poor character development. His whole motivation was to fix what happened in his world. Again, the second chance thing was the movie's motivation, not the character's motivation. Finally, teasing the Vanessa thing at the end just made me mad again. I love the real Vanessa, the one from Deadpool 1 and 2. This was just a skinwalker. Hashtag justice for Vanessa. And with that, that brings us to the end of part 4, and we're going to move on to the closing comments in part 5. As I said at the outset, my wife and I truly love the first 2 Deadpool movies. I think they were really irreverent films with heartfelt stories and characters that were enjoyable to watch. Mostly though, it was the connection between Wade and the people in the story and the journey he went through that made them enjoyable. Furthermore was the idea that enjoying them did not require the knowledge of any other side media. Yes, there were occasional meta jokes in the first 2, but it represented perhaps 1 or 2% of the film. Deadpool 3 is making an absolute killing at the box office, and it seems that everyone in the world loves it. However, I feel like it is so much more of a Disney product than the other 2, and my high expectations left me feeling incredibly let down by the film. I hated Wade in this film, and I just barely tolerated Deadpool. The villain was a moron most of the time, which is sad considering how well acted she was. Including the TVA was also a horrible idea, and it just felt like the primary goal was to splash so much fan service into the film that most people would be too busy cheering to notice how little respect was being paid to the previous Deadpool films, the characters in the film, the humor, the fight scenes, the CG, or anything else really. It really does just feel like a movie for nerds to fap to, which is fine if that's all you wanted out of it. Unfortunately for me, I wanted more. For me, I wanted another Deadpool movie, not a corporate cameo fest where the corporate monsters rape corpses and then poke fun at themselves while doing the very things they are poking fun at. I guess the best way to sum it up is this. I wanted the ha-ha film to have a soul, to have a heart, like the last 2 did, and I don't feel like this film did. So, my final evaluation of this film is a 3. The only thing that saved it were the performances of Hugh Jackman and Emma Corrin. They were stellar, though neither of them were really given good characters to play from the writing team. Which, on that note, here's an interesting tidbit to leave you with. Deadpool 1 was written by Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick. Deadpool 2 was written by those same 2 people plus Ryan Reynolds. Deadpool 3 had Ryan, Rhett, and Paul, and they added 2 other people. One was the director, Sean Levy, who worked with Reynolds on Free Guy and the Atom Project. The other addition? A man named Zeb Wells, notably a comic book writer. But he also wrote an episode for She-Hulk and was an uncredited writer on The Marvels. 2 of the most legendary shit shows of the entire MCU. Interesting. So, I guess that is all for now. Until next time, always remember.
Dubstep's on pussies.
You're so dark!
These ain't from the DC universe.